Coming up, we just live in the moment. We just love exploring life.
But you just don't want this life to end.
No.
Could death be curable?
There's a magic temperature of -130.
Can't wait.
The Aussies joining a worldwide movement
Nicer than a coffin.
to live forever.
2-hour window to deploy our team anywhere in the world.
But be warned, there's a catch.
They've got the technology to put us in, but they haven't quite figured out how to bring us out yet.
Cryonics, is it a science or nonsense?
There's an enormous amount of wishful thinking.
Hello and welcome to the 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. I'm Amelia Adams and today I'm joined by my fantastic senior producer, Laura Sparks. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, would you like to live forever? Just bear with us because earlier this year, Laura and I ventured into the fascinating world of cryonics. And boy, did we learn a lot. We travelled from the tiny town of Holbrook,
Yes.
which is on the New South Wales Victorian border, all the way to Arizona in the States to talk to world leaders in this space and also the humans, the people who want to maybe one day come back to life.
Yeah.
We should probably just start with a quick nitty-gritty of how it works. So the cryonics companies are aiming to or promising people or hoping to essentially in the future bring them back to life.
Yeah, and remember, not only a full body, but even a brain.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting concept that some people have chosen to freeze just their head.
Yeah, so for our viewers who haven't seen this story yet, I encourage you to watch it. But the technical description of cryonics is the practice of preserving life by pausing the dying process using sub-freezing temperatures with the intent of restoring health. And we saw this basically. Four bodies, and sometimes several heads, and we'll get to that in a minute, are stored in these huge steel and aluminium, the dewars they call them.
Yeah, dewars.
Yeah.
And liquid nitrogen is pumped in there down to, I think it goes down to minus 197
Yep, that's
degrees
about right.
Celsius, just under 200 degrees, minus 200
Yeah.
degrees Celsius. And we went into that room, didn't we, where all those dewars were in Phoenix, in Arizona.
So Arizona, that facility is, they're the world leaders and the longest running as well, Alcor, which was fascinating. Do they have about 200
Yes.
members?
Yeah.
They call the patients, the bodies, the heads.
Yeah.
And it was like, I felt like I was walking onto a movie set when we walked into that room for the first time.
Oh, yeah. And then, of course, during the interview, we had some very interesting noises happening while you're interviewing
Popping and
James.
banging. That's right.
And that was the let off of the
liquid nitrogen.
Yeah.
Yeah, from a tank that he said stored animals. So they have pets as well.
A chinchilla.
People, rare animals, but also people spend tens of thousands of dollars preserving their, pet dog or cat in case they might come back to life one day.
Yeah. There's a sadness to it though, too, isn't there? Because we met Kim Swosey's brother.
Yeah.
And her boyfriend from the time.
Yeah. So Kim is one of the patients in the Alcor facility, and she chose just to have her head cryopreserved. And it sounds a bit gory. I think we were both a bit taken aback when we first heard the description. But basically, upon death, and Kim had very aggressive brain cancer.
Yes. Yeah. And plus, she was a neuroscientist.
That's right.
A neuroscience
student. So she was really fascinated by the concept of cryonics already. Chose this when she knew she was dying, which was, a big thing for her parents at the time. They weren't initially on board with it.
No, they weren't.
But her brother and her boyfriend who we met, who was so lovely, were very supportive. But basically it meant that when she died, she was decapitated.
Yeah.
And then her head put in the tank, which we were able to take the boys back and visit.
And John, her brother, had never been there. Yeah. So it was the first time he'd seen where his sister was resting.
And that was a big logistical operation as well. You organised flying those boys in from around the country to Arizona for the first time. What was that like for you when they finally walked into that room? Because it's quite a bit of emotional build-up.
Yeah. It was lovely as well because they hadn't actually seen each other for a very long time.
That's right.
Let's remember, Kim was going out with Josh.
Yeah, and she's only 23.
Yeah, she was very young. They'd been going out for quite a few years. John knew Josh really well. And so it was kind of a really lovely reunion for the two men as well. They spent a couple of days with us in Phoenix and, we filmed them out on the hills outside of Phoenix.
That's right.
And they were really happy to be there.
Yep.
And I think for John, it gave him a sense of peace to finally see where his sister was.
Well, it's like a resting place. I mean, for some families that, the cryonics chamber room becomes, it's not a cemetery, but it's where they can visit and connect with their loved one.
Well, exactly. And I think it gives them a sense of hope, because if you go to a cemetery, there's no chance you're going to come back. And at least Kim died so young, so it was just a lovely thing, I think, for particularly John to see where his sister lay.
He was very measured too, I thought, Kim's brother John. He was very understanding of the fact that there is no evidence yet. It's never been done. No one's been brought back to life in any way. So there's no evidence it works. But as James, the CEO of Alcor, told us, there's no evidence it doesn't work.
Yes, and then
it also hasn't not been done, is the other side of the argument. And I find John was very measured in saying, she wanted to give herself, even if there's this much of a chance, like, why not give it a shot?
Well, do you remember leaping forward to interviewing the Peases, Alan and Barbara Pease?
Yes.
And Alan tells you that incredible analogy of if you're in a plane and there's one parachute and you don't know whether the parachute's going to work, but the plane's going down. Are you going to you're going to use the parachute or not?
Yeah, that's right. And he said,
you're going to use the parachute.
Cryonics is the parachute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were fascinating. They're an Australian couple, and we should mention. So we have our first cryonics facility here in Australia. It opened up a few months ago. We were there just before it opened. Yeah. And such a fascinating contrast for us, I think, after seeing this huge world-leading facility in Arizona, to go to this, I mean, it was essentially a shed, wasn't it?
Yeah, in a pretty tiny town, halfway between Sydney and Melbourne.
Yep.
And I think he said he chose it because he had to look at floods.
That's right.
Earthquakes and fire.
Yeah, and logistics as well. Like, you're on the main highway, so because they've got to get people there when they die. But they only had the one tank and the cooling chamber.
And they were doing the tests when we were there.
Yeah, that was fascinating. So Peter Solikides is the owner of Southern Cryonics, that's the Australian facility, and he has been besieged and plagued by naysayers for years and years and years. This is never going to work, this is a bunch of rubbish, but there's been enough interest, and he's been working with different facilities all around the world, that he's got it up and running.
Yeah, I think he said it took him 12 years to get it there.
Yep, so. And it's been a slow uptake. So when we went, he had, I think, 40 or 50 members, they call them, so Australians who had signed up and paid, up to $200,000, that when I die, I want my body to be, treated, and we'll talk about that. The process is amazing. Yeah. And then popped in one of these tanks and for, an indefinite amount of time as well.
Yeah, that's right. And remember, you asked him, are they all professionals? But they weren't. He said he's got bus drivers.
Yeah.
I can't remember the other.
But people from all walks of life and all ages as well.
Yeah.
So I spoke to Peter yesterday, and fascinating update, they have got their first patient member. So the tank that you and I, we went up on the ladder and peered into, I think I filmed a piece to camera there.
You did.
Sort of having a look and pointing around, has now got a human inside cryopreserved.
Wow.
It was an elderly patient. They knew that person was dying, so everything worked out for them logistically really well. Because as Peter said to us in the story, you can do all the training and drills and prepare as much as you like, but if the circumstances of death are difficult or the logistics don't work out, it's got to be done quickly. It can all go belly up. But this person they knew was dying. The family was really on board and supportive. They've had an interest in cryonics for a long time, so they were able to actually get to the Sydney hospital, was close to the funeral home. The team does their prep work on the body, and then on the truck to Holbrook and into that facility, into the cooling chamber and into the tank.
Into that tank that you peered into.
Yeah, so that's an Australian first.
Wow. And I think he was saying some of the members were in their late 80s.
Yes.
And he was almost on clock. He was almost trying to race the time
to get it ready. Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't really ready when we were there.
No.
We sort of were looking around going, but all credit to them.
Yeah.
And membership is growing too. So he said, I mean, not by huge numbers, but he said they've now got more like 70 people signed up. So it's only another 20. But, the fact is this is a real outlier in terms of this is a really alternate still, space.
And you spoke to someone who brought us all back down to earth in Clive Cohen.
Clive Cohen is, he's a world-leading neuroscientist. He works at London's King's College. There's a lot of cynicism and a lot of criticism. I mean, you stand at the pub and talk about cryonics, or at the, school gate, as you and I did when we were filming the story, and everyone goes, oh, what, really? But in the neuroscience world, obviously they're very evidence-based and proof-based. And Clive, I've got one of his quotes here. He basically said, somebody who has died, by definition, has a heart that can no longer be restarted, and therefore there's no way that organ of our identity, the brain, can get the oxygen back in there and keep the system functioning. So obviously they are concerned with the functions of the brain. And if you're on Clive's side of the argument, it absolutely cannot be preserved for any amount of time. And therefore, this is all, I think he used the word baloney or rubbish.
Yeah. And then, of course, James argues that, but IVF works. Why can't this work? But Clive answered back to that, didn't he? He said it's very different to do IVF on an egg and some sperm as compared to a full-grown human. Very different. You cannot compare the two. So,
and look, there's that argument of, we need the pioneers. We need the experimental, the crazy scientists and the people who say, otherwise so many of the inventions that we have, like IVF, wouldn't have come to fruition. This certainly feels like it's still a bit sci-fi.
Yes.
And when you get bogged down in the science of how the brain works and whether it's called cryoperfusate.
Yeah.
And we saw bags of this stuff frozen, remember, in the freezer in...
Yes, and
Phoenix.
He said that they were quite unusual. I think Clive said it was really that they don't work. It doesn't work.
He is of the opinion that there's no possible way the cryoperfusate solution can do anything to preserve cell function.
That's right. Yeah.
Because when you think about shutting down a brain, obviously we're not scientists, but you've got to, if you want to start it up again and get the oxygen back into it. That's not like turning on a light switch.
No, it's fairly confusing. The brain's our most complicated organ in our body.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, going back to Alan and Barbara Pease, I mean, good on them because they just want to give it a go, and they'd rather that than be buried and not have a chance at all. And their love was beautiful too. Let's remember their beautiful love.
I know, they're so sweet. And they had actually signed up together because they want to be together for all eternity.
And
so sweet.
And if
that's right.
If one can't be brought
back to life,
then that's it. The other one doesn't want to.
Yeah, they had this amazing energy and aura, didn't they?
Yeah. I mean, they started playing the piano.
I know.
They started playing love songs to each other.
Love songs. Who does that?
I don't know. It was gorgeous though to watch.
So sweet. I love them. But their whole energy around this, I guess, goes to the heart of our story. And it was hard for me at times. I found this a story where, sometimes you get into a story and you're just like, I really believe this side of it, even though we've got to be objective. Yeah. When I was in Arizona and I was in Alcor, I was like, this is amazing. The science behind this is phenomenal. Why wouldn't you give it a go? It costs a lot of money. So it is, arguably something for wealthy people. Then when I started looking at the cynicism and speaking to neuroscientists and we interviewed Clive, I was like, oh, okay, maybe not.
Pull it back a bit.
Yeah, and what I loved was actually logistically, the last part of the story we filmed was in Queensland with Alan and Barbara, and it was so uplifting, and I felt like that brought me back to just the essence of the story, which is why we do stories, is to tell them and to show people things that are fascinating and form their own opinion about it. And that is, do you want to live forever? Why do people want to? Why is this so attractive to people that they're willing to pay their money and get their bodies, in some cases, chopped up or hung upside down in a tank? And, they've got 6 kids, 4 or 6 kids, the Pieces.
I can't remember how many
they've got
children.
a lot of children.
I think they've signed, she's got some, he's got some.
That's right. They've got a big family and all their kids are really supportive.
Yeah.
But, it can be really difficult for the families as well.
Yeah. And I guess everyone's signing up for different reasons. I mean, Kim Swosey signed up because she was a neuroscience student.
Yes.
And so the science interested her. I don't think the science interests Alan and Barbara. I think it's more their emotional connection. They can't bear to say goodbye to each other. There's that element of it.
I think so.
I thought that was really beautiful.
And they're also like, why not?
Yeah.
They've got the money.
Yeah.
And they are, I think she said, we're explorers, we're adventurers.
That's right.
Like this, what if it works?
Yeah.
And, my job, as always, is to put the what if it doesn't. And she just kept saying, but what if it does? And I found that quite captivating.
Uplifting.
Yeah.
I think it ended up being less of a scientific story and more of an uplifting story, which is nice.
So I wonder, having sort of crossed the globe to do this, and now we've seen the developments in Holbrook, what's your take? Do you feel like this is going to really take off in Australia?
Well, I don't think most of us can afford it.
Well, that's a very good point. Yeah. Funerals are expensive enough.
Yeah. So I do think it's a certain type of person.
Yeah.
Obviously, A, you need the money, but
Yes.
B, you need the interest, the adventure
Yes.
of it all. It might really turn a lot of people off.
Yep.
A lot of people wouldn't like the idea of hanging upside down in a dewar for 80, 90 years waiting for it, for this to occur, if it ever does occur. Others don't like the idea of being buried. So
Yeah.
it depends. For me, I haven't made up my mind yet, Amelia. I don't want to think about that.
Yeah.
We're both too young.
I'm a bit the same, and I found some parts of the shoot quite confronting. Remember when we were in Arizona and we'd walk through the room full of the tanks and the liquid nitrogen, and we're like, this is a movie set and it's amazing. And then James, CEO, James Arrowwood handed us it's like a steel bucket, and he's very scientific. He's a very, very bright man and a fascinating man to interview. But he said, this is where the heads go. And you're holding this, steel bucket where people's decapitated heads are not their brain, it's their whole head, cryopreserved and put in a tank. And that was one of the moments in this story where I went, oh, no, I don't know about that.
No.
I'd feel really icky if that was my sister. But then, as we've discussed, Josh found it oddly comforting.
Yeah. Yeah, they both did, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was definitely an emotional roller coaster for me, this story.
Yeah, especially when James started talking about the decapitation of the heads.
Oh,
I
my
think we had to
goodness.
turn him off at that point.
Yeah. As we said, watch the story. Once you get into the science of it, there's obviously a whole lot of stuff that's way beyond our level of expertise, but it was certainly a fascinating shoot, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens with the Cryonics journey in Australia, and whatever viewers might think of it. I think, credit to Peter Solakidis and his team for a small team, and their
Very small.
volunteers
Yeah.
for getting it done.
It's their passion.
It's their passion, and for offering this service, which we don't know it doesn't work.
No, that's right.
We'll end on that great quote from James Arrowwood. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you.
And if
Thank
you
you,
haven't
Amelia.
watched the story, do catch up on 9 Now or on our YouTube channel. It's worth a watch.